Active Standby High Availability. Okay, everyone, let's see what we got for today. We have two firewalls. We got PAO1, we got PAO2. PAO1 will be our active unit and our highly available cluster. So we want to make sure that we have redundancy in our environment. We want to have to deal with an outage because this is a very, very critical device. This gives us internet access. This device will give us access to other resources such as the server environment. If you're connecting remotely, if you have a lot of users that are connecting remotely in order to hit your internal resources, probably are doing VPN services, and we want to make sure that is always up and active. So we're going to be configuring an active standby HA pair. In this scenario, or in this setup, we have two units. We have a unit that is going to forward traffic, it's going to do our routing and NAT translations are address translations. So this unit will basically do what every single function that the Palo Alto does. So this active unit will act as a normal Palo Alto. It will do all the normal forwarding decisions, all the policy enforcement, all the authentication requests, etc. The standby unit will just do the session and configuration sync from the active unit. So this standby unit is just going to be there waiting. If something happens, it will take cover and continue forwarding traffic. The way that it's going to do that is by syncing the data from the active unit. So the active unit, any changes that will happen, so if any administrator or any security engineer performs a change, adding a policy, adding a route, adding any change, except specific sections on PanOS that are not synced, which one of them will be the HA settings, of course. But everything else, everything that is done on the active unit will be synced to the standby, along with the sessions. And why it's important for us to have session synchronization between the two units. Anything that is being forwarded until that send and receive completes, this unit will hold that session. So this Palo Alto should have a copy of that session in case in the middle of a transmission, I don't need to re-session every single request. So if I go down, I can take over quickly and continue what the active unit was doing. We want to make sure that the standby has a copy of what the active was doing, and that is where we do session synchronization. We usually perform session synchronization via the high-speed chassis interconnect. If your unit currently has a high-speed chassis interconnect, most certain is going to be a higher end model, like the 5000 series. They'll come with a high-speed chassis interconnect, which is a QSFP interface, runs on 40 gig, and it does that session sync in active standby. In active, this unit will actually forward traffic. If for some reason the request came from one firewall, it needs to send via this link in order to reach the other firewall, because it might have the session established on the active and not the standby. So it needs to use that link to send traffic between the two units. But in active standby, I am sending session sync, and I am sending any routing decisions, etc. to the standby, so they have copy. So this unit will have copy of what the active unit was doing. So again, it's very straightforward. Configuring active standby will require, let's take a look at that. We have HA in active standby mode. It requires an IP, so it requires us to allocate at least 3 interfaces, 3 HA links. And there's certain, like I mentioned on my intro video, there's certain models that will come with the HA link, dedicated HA link, but in case you need to allocate a port as an HA, you can also select an interface that not necessarily is an HA port and configure as an HA, so you can then take advantage and configure the HA those interfaces. So in our case, I have 2 firewalls. I am allocating 3 interfaces. One interface will be my HA1A link, and this is the link, and if you remember our previous video, we talked about keep alive and hello, so I'm going to keep sending my units, hey, I am here, everything is okay, so it maintains that status between the 2 units on the pair. HA1B, again, we need redundancy, so in case HA1A goes down, I can still perform the same functions at HA1, and I will not have some sort of major impact. I will continue my cluster. I just lost one HA link. I can still use the other one, so we're good on that. HA2 or B, this is the link we're going to be using as our data plane traffic. So let me explain. So you have 2 types of traffic flow between the 2 units on the HA interfaces. You have the control plane traffic, which is going to go usually between the 2 units via the HA1 interfaces, And the data plane traffic, anything that is traffic related, not config related, anything that is traffic related will be used the HA2 interface or the HA3 or high-speed chassis interconnect, HSCI. So we're going to configure this scenario. We're going to allocate an IP. So I'm going to configure this as layer 3/30. We're going to have the .1 on the active primary, and we're going to have a .2 on the standby unit. If you can take a look here, so I have both units talking to the internet via Ethernet 1/1. I have a local inside interface of Ethernet 1/2. So this faces the inside network. This interface is sitting on this subnet, the 10.0.0/24. And I also have another interface allocated to the same Ethernet 1/2. And remember, anything that is configured here will be mirrored here. So make sure that the interfaces that you allocate are exactly for the same purpose. So Ethernet 1.1 will do the outside. So you make sure that the redundant link on the standby firewall is connected to the same network via the same interface. Make sure that, because obviously it's not going to work, because then the active will send traffic, will send the configuration of whatever interface I have here to this guy, and if I'm not plugged in on the right network, I am not going to be able to forward traffic. Same here, so I have 1/2 facing my inside, and same way on the standby unit. I have a test PC down below here, and with this PC, we're going to be pinging constantly to the outside, and we're going to, once we're done with the cluster, we're going to shut down, or we're going to bring down the active primary unit so you can see how traffic will fill over to the standby, and we should be able to see the standby becoming the active. And then finally, we're going to have, like you see on the slide, I have this in like a more clear format. So I have this more transparent. So actually telling you that this unit is not active, and it does have the same IP as the primary. So my interface from my internal subnet going to the outside is on .2, and the layer 3 address is .1 here. This same address is obviously configured here because, like what we mentioned before, any configuration on the active is replicated to the standby. So you want to make sure that you understand that anything has to be mirrored, not only the config but also the physical connectivity. So make sure that you're good on that. And you can see here the only difference here is the local IPs on the HA config. So the HA config is going to be one of the things that is going to be independent. You're not going to do a change here. It's going to be replicated here. You got to do it manually on both units, and we're going to discuss that as well. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and configure an active standby HA pair. So I got two firewalls, PA01 and I got PA02. I'm going to make this one our active primary, or the active forwarder in the pair, and PA02 will be the standby one. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go to PA01. I want to know that once I have that HA pair up and running, I want to know the status. So you want to add a widget that will show you the status. So right now it's saying HA is not enabled. Of course, I don't have the HA config. So let's go ahead and configure that. So let's go to Network, Ethernet, and on my setup, if you remember my slide, I have Ethernet 1/6, 1/7, and 1/8. So let me show you how that looks on the diagram so you are more familiar with it. We have three interfaces, and we got to change that mode to be HA. Once we change the mode on this three interfaces, we should be able to configure the HA settings. Same with PA02, we got to do the same thing. So let's start with PA01. I'm going to change this interface Ethernet 1/6, 7, and 8 to be an HA interface. Okay, let's start with the first one, 6. You go into Ethernet 1/6, and here where it says interface type, we want to select HA. We'll press OK. So we got the first one. Let's go ahead into the second one. Do the same thing. Okay, and the last one, 8. Okay, let's do the same thing here, and we should be good with PA01. Okay, we have the HA interfaces. They're ready to go, so let's go ahead and configure that active standby cluster. We're going to go to Device. We're going to go to High Availability, and this is where we configure HA. You begin by enabling HA, of course, and we're going to go ahead and click this Settings button here. And we're going to enable HA, and this is where we select group ID. Okay, your firewalls, they belong to the same group ID, so that's how the Palo Altos know that both of them are actually on the same pair. Not only that, the group ID So when you have a cluster, the group ID also generates the MAC address that is associated to the cluster itself. So there's going to be a virtual MAC address that is referenced on both units. So you can do that load sharing without having any duplicate IP. So there's going to be a virtual MAC address that is going to be created or generated once we do this configuration. So you got to make sure that the group ID matches between the two units so they can belong to the same group and they can see each other and exchange the HA configs and bring the HA links up and running. So we're going to select just group 1. You can type a description if you want. In our case, we're going to do active passive or active standby. We're going to enable the config sync, and this is very important because if I make a change on PA01, I want the standby unit, PA02, to get the copy of that config. Okay, and peer HA1 IP. And you remember our slide. Let's go back to our slide. In our slide, we have the first HA interface, HA1A. It has the /30 address space, the 192.168.10/30. I am going to allocate to the first firewall or the active one .1 and the standby .2. I am going to do the same thing with the other HA interfaces, HA1B and HA2. So we're going to allocate .2 on the standby and .1 on the primary. Okay, let's go ahead and configure that. And this is telling me the peer address, so don't be confused. This is not your local. So PA01, we know that it's going to be .1. They're actually asking you, the Palo Alto is telling you, hey, the peer address, which in this case is going to be PA02. So we know that's going to be .2. That is for the HA1A, and now we're going to do the same thing for HA1B or the backup interface. Okay, we'll press OK, and let's go ahead and configure the active passive settings. Select here, and we're going to say either shutdown or auto. What's the difference? Okay. You want to see the interface, or you want to see the active or the standby unit to be in a passive state. You don't want to see the indicators to be online. So it's going to look like the unit's actually dead. Only the HA interfaces will be seeing lit up. If you leave this in shutdown, you're going to see it that way. Or if you set it up in auto, they're just going to show as they're online, but they're not actually doing anything as far as forwarding traffic. In my case, I like to leave this in auto. And then you can monitor the fail hold down time to 1 minute, and this is what's going to tell, you know, hey, if I am actually down, this is my threshold here of a minute. I usually leave this in default. Let's go ahead and press OK. Election settings, very important. Election settings, it's going to tell me which one will be the active one. So we're going to say it's going to have a preference of becoming active versus the other unit. And you can figure this individually. The lowest number becomes the active, the preferred to be the active unit. So in this case, if I type 50 and I leave a PA02 as 100, then I am telling PA01 to always become the active, the master unit, if the HA group joins and they build the HA pair. So you want to make sure that you select the lowest device priority to the unit that always to become the active primary unit. Preemptive, if we have a case where I come back online, I want to regain that status again. I want to become again active primary. If I want to enable a heartbeat backup using the election, so I want to see, okay, I lost connectivity, so I want to have another backup of that connection between the two units, I can enable it here. I just leave this as normal. I'm not going to do that because I'm just going to use my HA interfaces to do that portion. And HA timer settings, how far do you want to have that session or election going on? You can tweak that. In my case, there's a reason why it says recommended. I'm going to leave it in recommended. And then, by the way, I haven't mentioned to you guys, but every time that you see a help, it actually is going to open a knowledge base article. This is actually stored on your firewall. So if you have a doubt about something on the Palo Alto itself, and you're on that particular session, you want to look for that help icon, you click it, and actually it's going to open a knowledge base article or directory that is actually stored on the Palo Alto itself. So if you can see here, this is the private IP of my management interface on the PA. So this is actually stored inside the Palo Alto. This is actually very good to double check your settings. If you have some doubts, you click on help and you should be able to see the information regarding what you're configuring. Okay, let's go back, press OK here. We're going to leave PA01 to be the preferred one because we assign a lower device priority. Control link H1. This is our first interface, and we have to configure those IPs to each individual interface. And this is the IP of my second unit. I need to configure that one on each HA interface. So beginning with HA1, which is this guy. This will be that one. So let's go ahead and configure that. And we're gonna then select the interface that will become HA1, which in this case is the first one, 16. Okay, I am making it a layer 3, so they're gonna exchange that heartbeat using that point-to-point. I don't need to select the gateway because I just want them cross-connected. If for some reason you have the other unit doing HA layer 3 and you're using routing to hit the other firewall because it's not actually on the same location, then you can select the gateway and then it should be able to find the other member of the HA link by looking at this IP. In this case, I don't need a gateway, so I'm going to leave that in blank. Encryption, so if you want that traffic, that HA traffic to be encrypted, you can select encryption, but in our case, because we're not going over another network in order for us to build the HA communication, I'm just cross-connecting both units, I am not going to enable encryption. I'm going to press OK. Let's do the same thing for the backup. Select here. And we're going to select port 7, that's our second port, which will be the HA backup. And we mentioned that our peer is .2, this guy will be .1. And again, I am not doing any sort of routing, so I'm just going to leave this here. Press OK. Let's go ahead and configure the data link side. And the data link, it's that interface that we mentioned that is going to be forwarding data plane traffic. So in this case, I am sending the session sync between the two units, so both units have a copy of the session table. I'm going to use this interface. If you're doing active-active, this will be the interface that is going to allow that traffic between two firewalls. So if I need to exit via another firewall, I can cross this data link and I can continue my forwarding path. I'm going to select port here, which will be the last one, 8. Either I can say I am going to use an Ethernet mode, meaning in layer 2, just send a broadcast and my two units will reach that information at layer 2, or I can make it a layer 3. So in this case, we can leave this in Ethernet. I'm just going to assign an IP, and again, it's going to be very similar as the other one. So in this case, we're going to do that 3. And again, I don't need to have a gateway because I am cross-connected. HA2 keep alive. Yes, I can have an HA2, this interface also to be a keep alive interface, but in this case, I'm just going to use as my data plane interface on my data plane traffic between the two cluster members. So I'm just going to leave this unchecked. Press OK, and we should be good. Let's go ahead and enable the HA by committing all my changes. And we'll configure the same thing on PAO2. Same thing, network, interfaces, and finally 8. We are good on the interfaces. Now we have the interfaces. If you don't do this and you try to configure the HA setting, you're not going to see those interfaces available for you to choose. So you got to make sure that you allocate first the HA interfaces if you don't have dedicated HA. We will be completing the HA configuration in our next video, ActiveStandby Part 2.